All right, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mindy Murdoch. I will be the moderator for this diversity panel this morning, Sunday morning at 9 a.m. if you're tuning in. It is our last day of our EEAI Vision 2020 virtual conference. We hope everyone has been enjoying themselves. And of course, if you've missed a session, most of those will be taped and available, if not immediately, within the next few days for you to view. And you've got up to a year to actually watch them on Whova. So make sure you bookmark your link to get back into the conference if there's something you wanted to look at later on or reevaluate again later. But I want a big thank you to our sponsors for this year's conference, NIPSCO, Mary Lee Environmental Center of Goshen College, and NAAEE. I am going to, since this is a panel, instead of me talking, although I do have a list of some questions to get things rolling, I'm going to let our panelists go ahead and give an opportunity to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves. And then I will throw a question out there and we'll kind of get the conversation going. So whoever feels comfortable with starting off, your reply to that, and then we can build off of that one. For everybody else that's joining us as participants, feel free at any time to throw a question into the chat box, and I'm happy to read that to our panelists. And then when we kind of run out of questions that I have, we'll open it up that you can unmute yourself and ask in person as well. So, but let's see, who wants to go first? Introduce himself. Who's awake this morning on a Sunday?
I can go first. My name's Phelicia. Oh.
Go ahead, Phelicia.
Okay, so my name's Phelicia Jozwiak. I'm an interpretive naturalist for the Elkhart County Parks. Before I had this position, I was a student at Purdue where I majored in natural resources and environmental science. While I was at Purdue, I also worked at their multicultural preschool, which was a really cool experience. Dealing with toddlers that didn't speak English was really fun. I got to learn a lot. I can count to 3 in like 6 languages now. But yeah, so now I get to work with kids and adults all throughout the county, sometimes extending beyond that, all for environmental education.
Aja, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'm Aja Yassir, and I am a regenerative agriculture gardener here in Gary, Indiana. And I also host healing nature events, mostly online now because of what's going on, the pandemic and everything. So that's who I am, but I do regenerative agriculture here in Gary, Indiana.
My name is Gunn. I work at Purdue University for the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. Phelicia, I'm sad we never met, but I am a recruitment and outreach specialist for the department, focusing on underrepresented minority students and getting them outside and involved in nature, because that is my passion. I want them to be able to see people that look like them that are outside in nature, and talk about careers that are available and help them get to that point through our programs. And I also more recently joined Illinois Indiana Sea Grant on their aquatic education team. So I'll be working up north back at home in Northwest Indiana in the Chicagoland areas and educating the youth about Lower Lake Michigan and the other Great Lakes.
And Dominique, will you our last panelist?
Hi, yes, my name is Dominique Edwards, and I basically specialize in implementation of local and regional food systems. And I am also the education coordinator for the Walker Street Park Community Garden in Michigan City. And I also just recently became the new engagement specialist for the city of South Bend. For the last few years, I've been working for our Metropolitan Planning Organization and Council of Governments. So I've been working pretty much in public service for the past few years. And some of my research when I was in graduate school, I'm a 2016 graduate from DePaul University. I have a master's in sustainable urban development. And my research has focused on revitalization efforts of post-industrial cities with urban agriculture.
So we'll start off with one that's pretty easy, hopefully. Everyone has their own stories on how, they got interested in this field of environmental education, whether it's, through sustainable agriculture or teaching, nature centers, however that might have been. So just really quick, do you want to kind of share how you became interested in kind of the role that you are currently playing? Like what allowed you, what interested you to become involved in that role?
I can go first again. So I was always interested in being outside. I was the baby in my family and the only girl. So sometimes I was out, playing by myself. So I had the nature that entertained me. And then when I was in high school, I interned with an aquatic biologist. So I thought I wanted to do fish for a while. But then when I got to college, they make you do all of the kind of like freshman, try this, try that. I really fell in love with the whole idea of education. And then I came back home to do it.
Well, I guess since we're going to go in the regular order, then we
Sure.
I'll go next.
You can skip a question if you don't want to answer it.
Well, my background is actually in finance. So I majored in finance in undergrad, and I used to work in the music business. So totally different from what I do right now. But I grew up in a family that gardened. That's just what we did. We never skipped a generation of farming or gardening. Both of my parents are from Mississippi, and they migrated to Chicago, and in Chicago they still gardened, and most people in the neighborhood had gardens as well. But I didn't have much of an interest in it, although I grew up in that kind of culture, until I moved away. I moved to Venezuela, and I just saw agriculture just booming in Venezuela and people eating from the land. And, it was near to what I knew, spending time in Mississippi during my summers and watching what was going on in Chicago. And we experienced a tragedy. My family, my husband and I experienced a tragedy. We lost our daughter. And the only healing that I could find was in the garden. And so I just put my hand in the soil for my healing. And that's where I am right now. And that's what I do. To regenerate soil also means to regenerate yourself. And so that's how I really, really focus on healing soil and really focus on healing myself while doing that and teaching that to others. So that's how I got here.
I kind of fell into environmental education. I never wanted to be a teacher. I actually, for the last 7 years, managed an aquatic ecology research lab. So going out into agricultural streams and doing population assessments of fish and aquatic insects and looking at habitat. But probably in the beginning of my career, I wanted to see more people that looked like me out doing stuff. And so I had done a lot of, I guess I was beginning to do a lot of events, taking kids outside, shocking fish, showing them what was in the streams by their schools and in their home areas. And that was kind of the stepping stone for me. And it just kind of spiraled. I did this pilot study for a program that I'm the director for called the Familiar Faces Project, and brought some kids from my hometown down to Purdue to rotate through a series of different stations where they learned about mammals and macroinvertebrates, and they got to see Wabash River fish and just get to experience all of that. And that was kind of where it all turned for me. I started doing outreach for the department a year after that. And then it kind of spiraled into also doing education for Illinois, Indiana Sea Grant, like I mentioned. And so that is my new path. And I'm so excited for it. It's amazing seeing people look at something that looks kind of gross, and then you tell them a little bit more about it, and they get excited. And so I love doing that.
Dominique, do you want to share, or I can go on to the next question?
Sure. So I guess how I got here is, well, my undergrad is in biology, so I actually was studying to become a scientist first. And so I did that. I went through my undergraduate and I became a scientist for a little while and actually worked in that industry in oil production and microbiology and a couple of different things. But also, before I graduated, my father, who was from Mississippi, had taught me how to grow my own food. And that was kind of a thing that just stuck with me for a while. And so I also wanted to develop a community garden here in Michigan City and share that produce with our local residents that basically our homeless population. And so it was incredibly difficult to connect with folks and kind of get them to understand the importance of local food systems and things like that. So I ended up finding myself right back in school and getting my master's degree in sustainable urban development because I wanted to learn more about community development and local food systems and things like that. So, and that's how I ended up getting to where I am.
Thank you. So within your field, what challenges or concerns, I mean, you can call it whatever you feel it should be named, do you see around diversity in environmental education? What are some of the biggest challenges and concerns that you've noticed in your field?
I think I'll go.
Are we going in the same order?
I'd like to answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the challenges and concerns is that it is not as diverse that this field could be. I mean, it is actually incredibly diverse, but the marginalized voices are not at the forefront of environmental education like they should be. And I think that those are some of the challenges and concerns that are happening in environmental education, and especially in regards to marginalized and disinvested communities that deal with environmental racism. So those are some of the things that I think are really challenging in regards to environmental education.
Hey, Mindy, are we all allowed to just ask questions?
Sure, let's let if any of the other panelists want to answer the question I threw out there, but then yeah, if there's one that you wanted to piggyback off that, that's fine.
Okay.
So.
I think because I deal with gardening and agriculture, and I know environmental education covers so much, but because I deal with agriculture and gardening, our biggest setback is land access and land ownership, and not really dealing with the trauma that we have connected to land, and not dealing with the fact that many of us don't have land access because we had to migrate north, and many of that migration happened because of violence. And so we have a very violent connection to land. And I'm only speaking of Black people because that's the perspective that I have. But we have a very violent connection to land, and we have a very traumatic connection to land. But the interesting thing about that is that we are also agricultural people. We descended from lines of agricultural people. And so, like I said, I think the biggest concern right now is the access to land and ownership of that land, and not necessarily working other people's land, because you can easily be moved from other people's land. I mean, we've seen that historically, we see that today. So that is the biggest setback that I see.
I would echo what both of the previous panelists said, and also add that representation matters. It's hard to go out hiking and not feel like you're welcome in that space. And it's not just just something in your mind, like people are actively saying, hey, you don't belong here, or as you're going to that state park or something, you see Trump flags flying around and you're not so comfortable in that space. So am I going to get attacked while I'm just trying to hike in the woods? I'm trying to rejuvenate, trying to take a break from life, regular life, crazy life. But it's just that access and feeling welcome in those spaces.
And I would say access as well. Speaking just,
No, go ahead, Phelicia.
I was just going to say, speaking from a small county perspective, access is really, it's an issue when we talk about like distance from a park. So even just getting to nature is a problem. Being able to afford for some of those options. Schools sometimes are able, but we see a big problem with money for field trips. So getting kids to nature is a big problem just on the local level.
And I'd like to piggyback off of what was said previously by Aja, like in regards to land access, especially in our region, it makes it incredibly difficult because in Northwest Indiana, we have 120,000 residents that are facing food insecurity, and a lot in 22 communities that are living under food apartheid. And so those are things that also need to be thought about and talked about when we're talking about land access, and also given respect to our Black and Indigenous populations when we're talking about stolen and exploited land as well. And how do we either give land back in form of reparations, or how do we work to better understand those traumatic experiences in regards to that stolen and exploited land? So I think that it makes it hard for us as land stewards to do the work that we do. We love our work. We continue to do our work basically daily, but we also have that traumatic connection too.
All right. I'm going to read unless Leslie, do you want to say it in person, or do you want me to read what you put in the chat? Okay, Leslie put into the chat, she goes, because I know this is something Dominique mentioned. So why do you feel that or think that minorities are not at the forefront of environmental education? How can we help them get there?
Well, I'll just be honest, environmentalism is predominantly whitewashed. And that's why we don't see a lot of minorities being heavily lifted, I should say, at the forefront of environmental education. And it's not that we don't exist there, and it's not that we aren't there working to do environmental education or environmentalism. It's just that our voices aren't being as leveraged as you would see someone who is non-white or white rather.
All right, very good. Paul put into the chat, so will Kamala Harris, our VP nomination, do you feel that she will assist in changing that diversity? They're all gonna be quiet about this one. It's too early, Paul. It's Sunday morning. We're gonna hope. We're gonna hope for the best, right? We will hope that there will be some change going on in our country. But we'll leave it at that one, and we'll move on. So, we like to also embrace those successes, and you guys have some wonderful stories. So, what are some examples that you've seen in some successes in embracing diversity and inclusion in environmental ed during your time?
I think there's a huge movement right now of Black people getting back to the land. And I think a lot of that has to do with what's been going on this year with the pandemic, with the police violence, and us being able to find some kind of solitude in land. So I think that has been a huge thing that I've been seeing. You see it all on IG, you see it just all over. People are really embracing plants. we're embracing land, we're embracing gardening for our healing. So I think there's getting ready to be a turnaround in it.
While it started from an ugly place, if you look up hashtag Black in Nature, a lot of environmentalists, a lot of environmental educationers or education specialists, they're like, you can see them there. You can just look at a whole page of all these people that look like you, that look like me, just shining. And that is it. It came from an ugly incident that was completely unnecessary. One of the reasons why people weren't going out. But now it's really changed, and there's so many Black in X weeks where you can find, if there's a certain field that you're looking to find more representation to bring into your classrooms, to find those speakers, to talk to your students, you can find them on those hashtags. Social media has been phenomenal for that in that respect this year, for sure.
And to go along with that, yeah, I was going to say social media as well. With COVID and having, so much more digitally, it's allowed me to like see all these groups, and it's just a connection. So there's like Black people that hike, and you can, they organize these different hikes in different places in the country. It's just a great networking connector, which, yeah, huge success. And without COVID and stuff like that, maybe that stuff wouldn't come to light. You wouldn't have as many people looking for those kind of opportunities.
And I was also going to say, we have amazing organizations that, like Outdoor Afro, for one, that specializes in getting folks out, and especially Black folks out, on trails and hiking and everything like that. And Outdoor Afro has existed for many years now, but we just don't hear about it as much unless you're actually Black. So, you have to be actually very intentional about, are there groups that exist that, specialize in reaching out to marginalized groups of folks. So.
Can I ask a question or sort of a comment? My name is Brian Forrest. I use he, him pronouns, and I teach at Indiana University, Bloomington, and live in Michigan City. So I'm happy to see some folks from my neighborhood. One of my concerns is that in our profession, a lot of us well-intentioned but moderately oblivious white folks have this attitude of doing for marginalized communities. What's your advice on well-intentioned white folks moving beyond that? How can we do for into a more collaborative approach to working with communities or working in communities?
I think you should ask them what they need. Don't go in assuming that the story I've been using more recently is a group going to Kenya and bringing computers where they needed water. They needed clean water. And so don't go in just thinking that you know what you want to give, and that's actually not what they need. So asking, just talking to that leader, talking to that community member that has that connection to everybody that they're going to listen to, and go about it that way.
And step back and let them do it. I mean, yeah, just step back and let them roll up their sleeves and do it themselves. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'll piggyback off that, Brian, and go. So how, since we are at the EEAI conference, how do you feel, how can EEAI support you in your role and other minorities within the field?
I think panel discussions.
I think doing things just like.
Hey, you both said the same thing.
Well, we both said the same thing. So
yeah. I was just gonna say, yeah, doing panels like this, that's a great step. And then earlier, I can't remember who, but someone said representation matters. So even, in the future, if someone were to watch this, they have the representation right here. So yeah, having things like this, allowing people to network, and then hopefully, you know, people take these ideas. There could be a panel later on in the future somewhere else. So yeah, this networking panel type thing for sure helps.
Well, and I would say to add to that is not just make panels about diversity for you, because we need you to be in all areas of EE. And what I've noticed, and I hear from some Black people, is that they're always invited to do the diversity thing and not much of anything else. And so I think we need to expand beyond that thinking as well.
Megan,
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. Any other ways that you feel that EEAI could support you in your role besides the panels and having a voice within conferences? Are there other areas that you feel that the organization could reach out?
I mean,
Well, some of us have like our Facebook pages, or we have you know, our IG pages and things like that. So, you know, if we have different types of events or whatnot, or content that needs to be shared, you know, and, you know, kind of following what we're doing in regards to our work, like that's really important too, and kind of being intentional in regards to kind of following what's happening, so, and things like that. So kind of staying in the know.
And I would consider us all non-formal educators. We were talking about it a bit on the K through 12 panel last night. Figure out a way to connect the non-formal educators to the K through 12 classrooms, so that those students can more readily see people with them.
Hey, Megan, or Mindy, can I build on that for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Megan, since you and I are going to start working on membership, I'm just wondering if there are ways that we can produce scholarships that are aimed at getting students of color involved from you know, Purdue and all of the other schools. What's the best way to reach? We're having a heck of a time reaching people to let them know that there are opportunities available. So what's the best way, do you think, to reach those populations at Purdue and obviously, Megan, going through people like you, but are there other ways that we're not thinking about?
I don't know, I'm still trying to figure it out too.
All right. Allison, I'm going to read one of the questions you put in the chat, and I'm going to open this to pretty much everybody participating because we don't really have that representation on the panel. But you put in there, how can we be more intentional about reaching Latino communities? Sometimes we translate materials and assume we're done, but doesn't always result in increased engagement, obviously. Any thoughts on that end? So any ways that you feel that some of the things that we're doing for the African American community, we can also do for Latino, or is there another route that someone feels that might be beneficial to kind of reach those other minorities in our communities that we're not?
Well, do you have Latinos in your organization? I think that would be a start. Maybe they could reach out. Maybe they can give advice on how to reach out to people within their communities. And do you have Black people who are active in the organization? They could reach out to people who look like them to be a part of what you're doing. I think what we've been saying over and over, representation does matter. It does matter. Representation definitely matters. People need to see themselves in positions, and they need to have they need to be able to see somebody they can relate to. So. And I think I keep on saying this trauma, but I think we really, really, really need to understand the trauma that goes along with being Black in land, and the trauma that goes along with being Latino, Latina in land as well. And I think until that is addressed, we will not have diversity, quote unquote, in this industry until the trauma is addressed and until we are healed. We will not have, because Megan was talking about, you were talking about hiking or something you said just spoke to me, because we still have land in Mississippi. And although we can be the only people on the land, when you walk through the land, you still feel the energy of, wow, I wonder if this is where people were running to, or I wonder if this is where bodies were hung, or I don't think most populations really understand how deep that trauma goes. I don't even think we understand how that trauma goes. And my sister and I, when we would travel to Mississippi every summer to spend time with our grandparents, we would be looking out the windows, and most people would probably look out the windows and see how beautiful the trees were, but we were looking out the windows like, man, I wonder if these trees held people. You know, I wonder if people hung from these trees. So that trauma still exists within us. And until that is addressed, we will not see any diversity, but representation as well. Representation matters.
I also think are those materials actually serving the purpose for that community? So yes, you translated that brochure, but did they need it? Is that information that they were seeking? If it's not information that they were seeking, then no, it wasn't going to be useful. And then one-off type thing. So making sure you're not just passing off this material and then expecting people to use it without any context. Like, okay, this is a brochure of flowers that are in this area. Let me show you how to go and find these flowers. So having more, and make it a series of wildflowers and trees and plants in the area. Not just a one-off, I'm going to do something for you and then be done.
I would also say that connecting with trusted community leaders as well, to try to make sure that the work is also intentional, because I just don't think that having materials translated is enough, that you have to go above and beyond to try to make sure that you're connecting with Latinx communities. So there's also a level of distrust in not just Latinx communities, but Black communities as well, that connecting with trusted community leaders could also help get the message across as well, or messaging across.
And also, I think when we talk about when we talk about Latino communities, and the unfortunate thing is that we lump them all together. Venezuelans are Mexicans, and Mexicans are people from Panama. I mean, like, people have different cultural norms that are not being addressed. So diversity would not be just addressing somebody from a Mexican community and thinking that you've addressed you've gotten Latinos diversified into your organization. It doesn't work like that, because people can't be grouped into big lumps of clay and think that they're all the same. I mean, Black people can't be grouped into big lumps of clay and to think that we're all the same. So
I was just going to kind of go with the organization, talking about that a little bit, like finding out what they're already doing. So there's already like a disconnect. So you're trying to reach out to them, but also finding out, like, maybe they already are gardening. Like where we live, we have in our parks all the time, they're playing soccer, having picnics. So we know that they're using it. So how can we help them, you know, garden? How can we help make the soccer field better for them to use, or make, you know, some of the facilities better? So just finding out how they're using what we have to offer already a little bit. And that's speaking more from that tiny little county park perspective, but that's how we're trying to figure out how to improve that relationship.
I agree. And figuring out how people are already, like you said, already using those spaces. Not everybody wants to hike. Not everybody enjoys getting lost in the woods and wandering around. So if they're using those areas for picnics, how can you make those picnic spaces a whole lot better and a whole lot more welcoming? I agree.
Do we have questions from any of our participants? Everyone's quiet. I'm going to throw one. It's kind of like, it's going to be a wrench. It's going to be a little bit different. So hopefully optimistic here. So who do you admire most in your field and why? There's someone, or it doesn't have to be your field, maybe somebody in your life. Who do you admire the most and why? Why have they made an impact to your life?
Right now, I'm really liking what Acres of Ancestry is doing. You can follow them on Instagram, and they're bringing to the forefront what is going on with Black farmers and the USDA and Black people losing land to the hands of the USDA. So I really like what they're doing. That's Acres of Ancestry. And Michelle E. Lee, the author of Working the Roots, she interviewed like a bunch of Southern Black folks about healing and gardening and foraging. I think that's her book is something that is a lot of value to have on your shelf. So.
I was super excited to see Rue Mapp from Outdoor Afro at the EEAI conference a few years ago. I mean, she's doing what I want to do, right? But on a much larger scale. I'll get there eventually. But it is inspiring to see someone that is getting adults and families outdoors in nature. And I want to connect with those kids and then get to their families that way. But she is very inspiring.
I wouldn't say a specific person, but just with like this, use of social media, there's all these like environmental activists that I follow and keep tabs on, and so many of them are young people. So it's like, all right, they're doing that, I can do that too. Like, what are they doing in their communities? How can I apply that? And it's just really inspiring to see what they're doing and try to branch off of that in my own way.
I saw a question that was specifically addressed to me.
Yes.
Okay. Paul says, due to past industry sins within Gary urban farming, how much do you go into soil quality and toxicity, and do you have funding to help find out what's in the soil? What we do here in Gary is totally funded by my family. We don't have a community garden here in Gary. This is a private place. And so soil toxicity and quality, of course, we had to get the soil tested initially, and we continuously get the soil tested. But with regenerative agriculture, we have practices that help to rebuild the soil. And so that's what we intentionally, I'm always building soil and always adding organic material to the soil. And that is the reason, I don't know if you read, but I had to fight a case with Gary because of my agricultural practices. But that's what I do. I always add organic waste to the soil. I'm always composting. I'm always building the soil. But because of, and it's not past industry sins, Gary is still an industrial place. It's still, the steel mill is still here. So this is something that we have to deal with on a daily basis. But there are some trusted places where you can get soil tested and learn what you need to do to eradicate those issues in the soil.
You collect compost from the community, or is it just from your family?
Just for my family, because I know what the compost is. I'm very intentional with what we do. So I don't know what they do with community compost. So we compost here on site. Not saying that I don't trust the government, but I don't trust the government.
Well, I was thinking more so, this is a little tangent, but my family is there. And so I'm sure, I'm trying to get them more environmentally friendly and, you know, baby steps, right? And so I could see at least my dad would go and collect all of the scraps and bring it over.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah.
So if there are community, even schools, if the schools started composting, because they send their compost to your land and use that.
Well, no, because, all right, so what we did, this is a home, so we don't have a lot of space. We bought this house in Gary. It sat vacant for 20 years, and we converted all the space around it into growing space. So the front yard, backyard, side yards, all of that's growing space. We grow medicinal plants, we grow mushrooms, we grow food. And so we don't have a lot of space. Sometimes I end up having to give compost away because it becomes a lot. You know, we eat a lot of vegetables. We have boxes and paper that needs to be composted. So, but yeah, there are some places I've dropped scraps off to the Bowman, which is not too far from us, and you know they have an agricultural program there. So, but this is just a home. Yeah.
Everyone's quiet this morning. What is going on here, people? You gotta have questions. I know you do. You tuned in for a reason. Oh, we're getting more things here. So this is just a comment because I met a Latino park ranger in Indiana Dunes State Park. It made it a point to be addressed by his last name. He wanted kids to recognize him as Latino, and I'll never forget the impact it had on me. So representation is so important, especially in environmental education careers, because Latin immigrants often don't see that as an option. So I think that goes for a lot of the different cultures, that they just don't see themselves in some of these, not just environmental ed, but a lot of other different, you know, kind of careers that are out there. So.
I agree with that. I'm just going to make a comment. I just worked with the Indiana Wildlife Federation to create a video that they purposely decided to do it in Spanish with English subtitles for that very reason, to make sure that we were reaching a different audience. And the host that we had do that was Hispanic as well. And so she was so excited to do it. And her whole thing is that she wants to work towards bringing Latinos and Hispanics out into nature as well. And so it's really great to be involved in something where they're thinking beyond just the typical of, you know, let's do it in English and do Spanish subtitles. So it was a little different to do it that way since I was editing the video together and I don't know Spanish. So, but she made it really easy. So I would just say, you know, it can be done and we can all do it. We just have to reach out to those communities and work with them to do it.
Go ahead, Dominique, go ahead.
I just saw something in the chat that asked if there was like environmental and ecological network amongst Indiana people of color. There's a new group that formed, I think this year, called Brown Faces, Green Spaces. And I think they're primarily working within Northwest Indiana. So I just wanted to point that out.
Good job. You missed that one. That one shifted down before I could see it. So I have another. I know Aja gave a couple, but do you have any resources that you've come across or that you feel would be very helpful to explore the issues of diversity with environmental education in more depth for those that are trying to really reach out and to involve minority groups within either their programming or within their departments? any kind of resources that you've come across that you feel would be a benefit for others to look into.
I would say outside of books and things, just explore communities, talk to people. Being from Chicago, I find a lot of pleasure going into different communities and going into Pilsen and seeing how they grow, what they're growing, and going into Chinatown and see how they grow and what they're growing. Because I think when we talk about diversity in this industry, we have to realize that we're talking about bringing in people who already are agricultural people. You know, they already have a base of knowledge of agriculture. It just may be different from your base of knowledge of agriculture. So I think finding those similarities are important. It makes me think about my neighborhood in Chicago. I grew up in Inglewood on 55th and Princeton. And I remember growing up, being young in the 80s, and all these people started moving into the neighborhood, all these people from Belize and different parts of Central and South America. And we already had people from Arkansas and Mississippi who were growing food. Everybody had a garden. But when these other people started coming in, we had a language barrier. They were speaking English, but you know, we didn't necessarily understand all of the English they were speaking, and they probably didn't understand all of the English that we were speaking, but there was a connection with plants. So I saw my mom learning about the different plants that the people from Belize were growing, and they were learning about the plants that she was growing, and they started trading seeds. So I think we have to realize people already have they come from an agricultural line of people. So you need to really reach out to them, person to person. It's not necessarily going to be found in a book. It's usually found just opening your mouth and talking to people and realizing that you do have similarities.
So I saw in the chat, someone was asking for books. Can we add a few more books? So I'm going to drop a couple of books down into the chat for folks. There's one book that came out this year that actually is a collective of stories of environmentalists of color from all over the world, including myself. I was featured in the book as well. It's called One Earth, People of Color Defending the Planet. So, and it's a really pretty great book. So there's some amazing stories in there. And then I also will share with you Freedom Farmers with Dr. Monica White, and a couple of other different books that folks can get plugged into.
And I'll make sure that we save the chat as well so that it comes up and is available after this.
I can't remember their names, but there were 3 panelists for the NAAEE conference a few weeks ago, and they all have books that I will acquire at some point. But they're in the Acorn bookstore, but you can find them on the NAAEE website.
Someone just recommended, I wrote it down, but the Black and Brown Faces in America's Wild Places. Someone recommended it to me, and the author of it is doing a talk, and it's free, coming up, but I didn't write down the author, but that's just a recent conversation.
Dudley
Anyone wants to look
Edmondson.
into it.
Yeah, Dudley Edmondson is the author of that book.
Right.
He came to speak to us at Purdue, maybe it was last year. Phenomenal. So I haven't read the book yet. He had clips of the book because he recorded all of the sessions so that he could have something to reference. But he showed us some of those clips, and it was super powerful.
Yeah, I guess, like I said, there's a talk, he's doing a talk that's free, like a virtual. So if you Google it, probably can find it.
Well, we got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to throw one more question out there, and then if anyone thinks of something else. So what gives you hope within your field? We'll leave hopefully on a good high note. What gives you hope for the future within your field?
Seeing all the Black in Nature posts, seeing that there are actually other Black people and brown people getting out and hiking and birding and fishing and just doing all of that. We're here, we're kind of hidden, or we have been hidden, but their faces are on the forefront right now. So that gives me hope for sure.
I would agree with that, seeing people out, and then also like seeing more opportunities. So like locally, for the high school, there's like an environmental track now. So kids are having those options and learning even earlier than, making that decision in college.
The other thing that gives me hope are sessions like this, right? People want to do better, and they're going to learn more so that they can do better, and not just saying, oh, we want to do better, and then nothing comes from that, right? People are actively trying to make sure these spaces are more diverse, and diverse in different ways, right? Like putting our pronouns on our name so that other people feel comfortable. Just it's lots of different things that we can do, and people are doing it.
We got one question from Paul. Oh, hold on. Says, what is one thing that each community can do to address diversity within their town?
I'd like to take a stab at answering that question from a weirdo kind of urban planning perspective. So as an urban planner, and basically based off of some of the things that Aja also brought up, is that as Southern Blacks moved and migrated to the North, we have a huge legacy to think about in regards to spatial isolation within our communities. And so a lot of our communities are still segregated, whether folks understand that or know that or not. And so there's a lot of towns that are segregated by race, segregated by class. And so those are some of the things that need to be thought about, is how historically we have gotten here. And so how do we kind of, and there's really no way to move past some of those things until we actually understand like how our communities have been designed historically. And so that's how we can kind of start thinking about how to address diversity, is by understanding our history, and then understanding how that history has impacted how our communities have been developed. Because I think that in certain cases, I mean, we can kind of look at our election map recently, right? And so a lot of that can historically, give rise to a lot of uneasiness for Black communities and stuff like that, right? So let's kind of think of how we can address some of these things and make folks, I guess, feel more at home in a place that they were born and raised, I think, right? So those are some of the things that I think about.
Dominique, I have a question for you, if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you make people feel more at home? Like, what are some ways that people can be made to feel more at home in places that they're, from?
That's something I'm still struggling with myself. A lot of folks woke up and this past week, and they were kind of shook And especially, and this is kind of a reality that we have been born and raised in, right? Especially, I've been born and raised here in Michigan City, lived here pretty much the majority of my life. And a lot of folks are like, I can't believe this is, you know, the nature of our community and things like that. And it's just, some folks are on the outside looking in, not realizing that this is our history, this is our legacy, unfortunately. And I was just kind of, and I still have to kind of teach folks what sundown towns are and things like that, because those are still very much in existence. If folks tuned in this to watch Lovecraft Country over the last few months, we kind of saw that. And it was, what was crazy is that the monsters in that wasn't what was the scariest part, unfortunately. That's what I have to tell people. Like, the monsters in Lovecraft Country was not the scariest part of that series. It was the racism that was the scariest part of that series. And the racism that is still very, very prevalent in our communities. And so I'm still kind of stuck on trying to figure out how to be at home and feel comfortable at home in a place that you were born and raised.
Yeah. I was thinking about the Lovecraft Country podcast that went with the show, and one of the women is from Indiana, and she said, you know, the sundown towns, that's not fictional at all. They still exist in Indiana as well. So yeah, just making a comment, no question.
Well, if we don't have any last questions, about 2 minutes till 10, so we can say a huge thank you to our panelists for spending the morning with us, for answering, I'm sure, some very difficult questions for everybody, but very eye-opening and very, it was a great conversation to really, you know, get a lot of good feedback, get a lot of good, you know, things to consider, things to continue that conversation even after this. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and everyone enjoy the rest of their Sunday. As I said, I'm going to make sure that I save this chat as well as this recording, because there's a lot of really good resources on the chat itself. And we'll try and make those available on Whova. So if you missed something on the chat, hopefully I'll make sure that Carla has that put up there so that you can go back through and pull any of those resources that you saw. All right. Well, thank you guys so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.